What if everybody just said no to digital ID? They refused to comply. How on earth would they enforce it? They would have to be absolutely brutally authoritarian with fines, penalties, enforcement notices, enforcement action. That feels to me very much like the poll tax, which is exactly what happened. People refused to comply. Local councils were trying the authoritarian enforcement approach, which became unrealistic because of the sheer numbers of people that just flat out refused to pay it. So how on earth would they do this in a digital age when it applies to everybody, not just paying a tax? I would argue that it could be worse than the revolt against the poll tax. This would attack people's very livelihood. Now, whilst there is no enshrined right to work in legislation, there are rights associated with work throughout pretty much all of the legislation that governs working. And moreover, we still have ECHR, and Article 8 and the right to a private and family life includes choosing what you do for work, and there's common law rights to work. And I think it was Lord Denning that said the right to work is as fundamental as the right to property. So there are all sorts of legal arguments about this, but more fundamentally, as I said at the outset, what would they do if everybody just flat out refused to comply? So whilst I bring something on screen, do bop that subscribe button down below. I know I keep asking, but it is the difference between helping a channel to grow and not. So I depend on doing that and hopefully bringing you content that you enjoy. So thank you very much. But let's go to Rupert Lowe first of all. Let's take a look at this, because Rupert Lowe is actually getting quite a bit of support here from fellow MPs. He says the list of MPs supporting the cross-party letter opposing digital ID continues to grow. And he gives thanks and then huge credit to everyone that's contacted their MP. I did a video urging people contact your MP, and I've had some responses from viewers who've had a response from their MP that essentially send them a sales pitch, which I'm going to go through, not those responses, but some of the general sales pitch in a minute, because it's hugely contradictory and frankly, it's a load of rubbish in part. But nonetheless, lots of MPs are now signing this letter. Rupert Lowe is right. This is down to you getting your MP to sign it. And the letter reads as follows. Dear Prime Minister, we are writing to register our profound and passionate opposition to your reported plans for a compulsory UK-wide digital ID scheme. Such a policy would represent an unprecedented level of state control over British citizens. This is a fundamental change to the relationship between the individual and the state. It's dangerous, intrusive, deeply un-British. It risks building the foundations of a surveillance state, one that will inevitably expand in scope over time. That is certainly my concern. He goes on, we urge you to abandon these plans immediately. At the very least, you must commit to bringing in any proposal before Parliament for full scrutiny and a free vote, and to fully consulting the public before attempting to impose such a drastic measure on a reluctant country. The British people do not want this, and the British people do not need this. You've seen my polls. I'll link them below. Hundreds of thousands of people voted, and the last I checked, 97% that said they don't want it and they will not comply with it, which is something I'm going to go back to in a minute. Compulsory digital ID would mark a dangerous and permanent shift in the balance of power between government and governed. We will oppose it at every stage. Sincerely, Rupert Lowe and many other MPs have now signed this letter. So check if your MP is on it. If not, there are many more that could go on it, should go on it. Contact your MP, implore them to sign it. Politely, I might say. Don't start sending threatening emails. That's not a good thing to do. But let's remind ourselves of how Keir Starmer told people that this is going to happen. And I choose my words deliberately because that's precisely what he did. He was very clear about it. He made it very clear. But I'm going to challenge the very premise of being able to do what he says in just a moment. But let's just remind ourselves of exactly what he said.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament.
And he says free of charge, but mandatory for the right to work. Now, take a look at his face here. and then before he says the next bit, watch him stand upright, bring his hands together in some sort of dictator stance. Watch this.
Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID.
Now, I would join many people's sentiment to say, who on earth does he think he is? He's the Prime Minister, but who does he think he is to tell people that they will not be able to work without this digital ID that will allow them to track everything they do, everywhere they go, plugging into every system, everywhere in the country and arguably everywhere on the planet. And if you fail to do that, you're not allowed to work. Well, then the natural question then is, well, what happens if I don't do it? What happens if companies don't do it? Now, the legislation currently requires employers to check that you have the right to work. And that does work, because whilst there is illegal working going on, we don't deny that, but it does work in that it allows employers to check that people have the right to work. And it's when they don't do that, and then people are working illegally, then that is when we have a problem with illegal working in the UK, because employers are not doing that. Or we have, as alleged, as reported, delivery drivers for Uber Eats or Deliveroo or whoever renting an account off someone who is registered and thus working illegally, taking thousands of pounds a week, and they're paying, up to a couple of £100 a week to rent this account, all illegally. This is not going to stop that. Let's be clear about it. If that is already unlawful, it's already wrong. And to be fair to the companies, Uber Eats and Deliveroo and whatever, I don't think for a second that they condone this behavior. I don't think for a second that they support it, they like it, they want it to happen, because it's only going to look bad on them if something goes wrong. Like in my last video, I talked about the update to their terms to scan for deliveries for over 18s. And people rightly will have the worry that let's put it bluntly, someone who is an illegal migrant in this country is going to take a photograph of your ID. They're not supposed to take a photograph anyway, but if they do, they can do it under the guise of scanning the ID under their requirements and actually take a photograph of your ID. So, how on earth can they stop all of this just by having a digital ID? They will still do it. What part of that don't they get? This is a logical fallacy to think that if everyone else in the UK must have a digital ID in order to work, and employers must check that digital ID in order for them to work, they think that that's going to stop people working illegally. It's just not going to happen. Either they will take cash in hand, or, as in cases like these examples, they will rent accounts unlawfully, and they'll do the work anyway, and they will collect the money anyway. But then we think, well, what about the penalties? How are they going to enforce it? What about the penalties? Because when they want to enforce law, there's always a penalty for it. So let's take a look at this. So when quizzed about this, Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, said that whilst digital ID will be compulsory for anyone who wants to work in the UK, I mean, it sounds ridiculous when I say it, but that's what they say. She argued that plans will make a significant dent in the number of people who are able to work illegally. I beg to differ for all the reasons I've just said. It's not going to change a thing. But then she goes on to say, but acknowledge that introducing the new form of ID would not change the penalties business face for failing to check whether employees have the right to work. So businesses will still get punished if they don't check that they have the right to work. Ergo, if they say that employers have to check it with this digital ID, that is very different from checking that they have the right to work. If someone sort of rocks up with a British passport and there's no encumbrance to work or anything else of the sort, and they don't need any permit or right to work or anything else, they're not on an e-visa and they don't need to share a code or whatever, there's no restrictions on them working. So why would they need to check anything else? They already know that they are allowed to work. Or if they're in existing employment, they already know that they're allowed to work, so long as they've done the checks. If they've not done the checks, then there are penalties for it if they are found to be working illegally. So that won't change. Thus, not much will change. So let's go back to this article and dig a little bit deeper. People will not be required to carry the ID. It'll be held on smartphones. They won't be asked to produce it. Although all citizens in the UK will have a digital ID, it will not be mandatory for people to use it. It will be entirely their choice. This just seems contradictory to me. She referred to the debates over ID cards going back to Tony Blair. She said, we've debated it ever since. It's important, of course, she said, that we protect people's civil liberties, and we've got no intention of pursuing a dystopian mess. But I do think for most people, it's a fairly common sense and practical measure. Businesses will continue to face the same penalties they currently do for failing to confirm that employees have the right to work, of course, only if they are found to be working illegally and they haven't done those checks. Companies are already meant to check on whether people have the right to work in the UK and face penalties for that. They'll continue to face those penalties. And now I'd like to take a look at this page here, because there's lots of contradictory things and things that just don't hold basic logic. It's from Labour Together, BritCard, a progressive digital identity for Britain. Let's read this together. For a progressive society to work, it needs to be able to collectively agree who's allowed to join it. Now, I think if we took a referendum on physically stopping boats of illegal migrants coming into Britain, we would vote to physically stop the boats from coming into Britain. And if we had a referendum on voting whether to return them to France, whatever France thinks about it, we would probably jointly vote to return them to France. That's my guess. No criticism if you don't agree with that, but that's just my guess. But this is obviously contradictory to that assertion there. Because it will exclude those who cannot join it, it needs to give its members proof they belong. Again, the irony here is louder than the words on the page. The UK doesn't do this, it says. Again, the irony in this phrase, because I think it's about 35,000 illegal migrants that will be by the end of this week that have come across the channel, who technically don't belong, technically shouldn't be here. But again, the irony jumps off the page. They say our conflicted historic approach to issuing identity credentials has led to a situation that represents the worst of both worlds. We currently can't effectively stop people from living and working in our country illegally. Well, again, there are other measures. If they think that forcing every single adult, tens of millions of people in the UK to have a digital ID is going to stop people illegally coming to the UK and illegally working in the UK, then they are incredibly naive, because that is a ridiculous proposition to say that that is going to stop people coming here and working here illegally. It's just not going to stop it. My opinion, of course. Nor can we effectively support legal citizens and residents to exercise their rights. Well, quite. But again, this is not the answer. Certainly not the answer people want. And it goes through and it tries to make the point that the only answer is this digital ID. And then, again, the irony, the bit in yellow, it would support better enforcement of migration rules and protect vulnerable British citizens from being wrongly denied their rights. This is absolutely ridiculous. Forcing every adult to have a digital ID is not going to enforce migration rules or protect British citizens. It is just so disconnected, it is unfathomable. They say it could end identity exclusion, resolving uncertainty and risk for those whose status is uncertain, provide a quick, secure, privacy-preserving means for everyone to verify their identity and their migration status when dealing with government, when taking up a new job or taking on property. Now, this, again, the irony is too loud here, because let's just turn this page off for a moment. Now, take the situation that not every adult has a smartphone. Certainly, with great respect, above a certain age, a lot of adults don't have a smartphone, don't want a smartphone, have no intention of getting a smartphone. They might still work, but they don't want a smartphone. They don't want an app. They don't want to register on an app. They have privacy concerns, whereby they say here this is privacy preserving. On the contrary, having all of your records tied together with a photo ID somewhere is not privacy preserving. It is a privacy risk. Believe me, it is not a case of if this is hacked or leaked or compromised. It is a question of when. Because with great respect to whoever ultimately has any involvement with the setup of this software, whether it's within government or contracted out, which is quite likely, it's quite likely to be contracted out. It's already in some of the draft bills for the children's registration, which I've mentioned in a previous video. But that alone is a security risk. As soon as it is a private company that's doing it, there is a risk there. There are countless companies who have had data leaks, data breaches, hacks, and other compromised security elements, including those who are really there to protect you and do credit checks and things like that. Equifax, Experian, lots of other companies have had data leaks and breaches, and your data's been out there. Every week I get another email from a prospective client saying that they've had an email from a company that their data's been leaked. These are from finance companies, they're from insurance companies, they're from tech companies, providers, car companies, you name it. These companies have had data leaks and breaches. And I say it is a question of when, not if, data is leaked and breached by this digital ID system one way or another. And so it is not protecting your privacy, it is putting it at risk. Regardless of what they say, it is putting it at risk. But coming back to the original point, they say that it's going to increase inclusion and reduce exclusion. But it is going to exclude people. Coming back to the very premise that Keir Starmer said, and I quote, "Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom without a digital ID." But so what if you don't have one? That's excluding everybody that doesn't have one. And let's say that someone has, I don't know, any kind of learning difficulty, any kind of visual difficulty, any kind of other disability whatsoever. Or maybe they are at a certain age, they just don't want a smartphone and therefore it can't have this app and it can't connect to the system and it can't produce a digital ID. But they still want to work. Maybe they still want to do some part-time work. But in order to do that, they're supposed to have a digital ID. Therefore, they can't work, according to Keir Starmer, because they don't have a digital ID, but they don't have the smartphone to get one, so they are automatically excluded. How does that work? How many millions and millions of people will be excluded and prevented from working because they don't have a digital ID? And they also say that it's not mandatory. You won't be asked to show it. It's just that employers will have to check it, and the same penalties will apply if they don't check it and someone is found to be working illegally. Because my understanding, if there's any employment, I haven't fully checked this, but if there's any employment specialist, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is that employers are fined if they are found to have employed someone who's no right to work in the UK, but they have not then done the checks. So they're not fined as such for the failure to check, but failure to check if it's found that they're working illegally. That's my understanding. So this is not really going to change a thing. I suspect people will revolt and refuse en masse. There'll be countless millions of people, and employers for that matter, who will refuse to take part in this complete nonsense. And whilst I'll do the balancing exercise, I usually do, there are possibly some positives to it in that it could give you easier access to certain things. It could give you quicker verification on certain things. It could give you a profile that you can share with companies more easily and all this sort of stuff. But I believe the vast majority of people don't want that if it means they have to have it and essentially allow the government to spy on everything they do, everywhere they go, everything they buy, or maybe everything they say on social media, every account they have with social media, practically everything. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, they've not yet said so. They've just said that it will enhance the reach and the scope of integration for different things. To me, that's code, in my opinion, that's code for we will ultimately get control of everything. And then what happens, you've seen the videos where someone's gone to take cash out of a bank and they've said, well, because of money laundering regulations, we need to know what the cash is for. And he said, it's to buy a bike. And they said, how much is the bike? He said, I don't know yet. And they said, well, come back and tell us when you know how much it is. And it's like, well, he hasn't decided how much it is yet. Some of these are real stories. Some of them are skits, I grant, but many of these are real stories. Now, what happens if the government decides that you don't have the right views, or you're not saying the right things, or you're accused of something, therefore they switch you off. They switch you off social media. They switch you off access to banking. They switch you off transport, all sorts of other things. Believe me, these are things that they would be able to do. And it would be something, I believe, that would gradually creep, and they would eventually be getting into these things and forcing these measures of control and oversight, which I don't think you want. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for watching.